You think you're free because you chose your cage. You call it life, the routines, the responsibilities, the carefully constructed identity everyone admires. But somewhere deep inside, beneath all the noise and negotiation, something's screaming. Not loud enough to stop you, but loud enough to keep you awake at 3 a.m. wondering if this is really all there is. Here's what nobody tells you. The most dangerous prisons don't have walls you can see. They have beliefs you defend, personas you perfect, and comfort zones you mistake for safety. You've been calling it freedom while living inside invisible bars made of fear, expectation, and the desperate need to control what can never be controlled. Eastern philosophy has known this for centuries. Buddhism speaks of samsara, the endless cycle of suffering born from clinging to illusions. Taoism teaches that the tighter you grip, the more you lose. Zen masters point to the cage and ask, who built it? The answer is uncomfortable. You did. But here's the paradox that changes everything. The very pain you've been avoiding, the collapse you've been preventing, the void you've been terrified of. These aren't your enemies. They're the doorway. Shadow work, ego dissolution, spiritual transformation. They don't happen in comfort. They happen in the breaking, in the falling apart, in the moment you finally stop performing and start feeling. This video isn't about escaping your prison. It's about recognizing you were never actually trapped, just convinced. And that recognition, that single shift in seeing, changes everything. What you're about to discover will dismantle everything you thought freedom meant. And it starts with a simple question. Why do you still call prison freedom? There's a peculiar comfort in choosing your own chains. The prisoner walks the same path every morning, touches the same cold walls, breathes the same stale air, and calls it freedom because he decided which corner to sit in today. This is the first lie of the ego, that preference equals liberation. Eastern philosophy teaches that attachment creates suffering, yet here he is, attached to the very cell that confines him. He doesn't see the bars because he painted them the color of his dreams. The mind whispers, at least it's mine, and he believes the prison is a temple. Shadow work begins when you notice the comfort has teeth. Most people live inside invisible prisons built from fear wrapped in familiarity. They call it stability when it's really just fear refusing to move. The monk once said, what if what you call stability is just fear refusing to move? And that question cracks something open. Buddhism speaks of samsara, the cycle of suffering born from clinging to illusions. And here it is, the illusion that repeating the same pattern is somehow living. The jailer is invisible because he wears your face. You lock yourself in and lose the key on purpose. Emotional pain starts as a whisper that something's wrong, but the ego drowns it out with the noise of normal. Self-awareness is realizing you're both the prisoner and the warden. The cell is comfortable because you designed it to be. You chose the wallpaper, arranged the furniture, hung pictures of who you think you should be. Zen philosophy points to the danger of mistaking the map for the territory. You've studied the blueprint of freedom so long you forgot to walk through the door. The mind-body connection fractures here. Your body feels the cage, tight in your chest, heavy in your limbs. But your thoughts insist everything's fine. Trauma healing can't begin until you admit the wound exists. People spend decades perfecting the interior design of their limitations, calling it knowing themselves. But self-awareness isn't decorating the cell. It's recognizing you built it in the first place. This is where spiritual transformation stalls, at the threshold of comfort. You've been conditioned to believe that freedom requires permission, that awakening needs the right conditions, that enlightenment through pain is something other people experience. Taoism teaches Wu Wei, effortless flow. But you can't flow when you're gripping the bars with white knuckles. Let's be practical here. Think of the person who stays in a soul-crushing job because it pays well, or the relationship that ended years ago but neither person will leave. They'll tell you about their reasons. their responsibilities, their realistic approach to life. What they won't tell you, what they can't see, is that the psychology of pain operates on a simple principle. Anything you refuse to release begins to rot. Non-attachment isn't about not caring. It's about not clinging to decay. The most dangerous prisons don't have walls you can see. They have routines you defend. Every morning, the same thoughts. Every evening, the same escape into distraction. Mindfulness becomes impossible when you're too busy maintaining the fiction. The ego calls it consistency. The soul knows it's just fear dressed in discipline. Buddhism speaks of impermanence, the truth that everything changes, everything passes, except you're trying to freeze time inside a cell and call it peace. Inner stillness isn't the absence of movement, it's the presence of truth. And the truth is starting to ache now, isn't it? Something inside is growing restless, like a prisoner who just noticed the lock was never actually fastened. Life starts to ache when comfort becomes a cage. It's subtle at first. A restlessness that arrives at 3 a.m., a question that surfaces during the commute, a feeling that something's off, but you can't name it. Eastern philosophy calls this the beginning of awakening, though it feels more like unraveling. The bars you don't see are the ones you've internalized. Beliefs about who you're supposed to be, rules about what's acceptable, agreements you made with fear decades ago. Every routine is a wall, every certainty a lock. The monk whispers that what you call stability is just fear refusing to move, and suddenly the ache has a voice. Shadow work doesn't ask permission. It arrives as discomfort disguised as destiny. The invisible calling doesn't come wrapped in clarity. It comes as disruption. You're going through the motions, and something inside starts screaming, but the sound is so unfamiliar you mistake it for anxiety. Buddhism teaches that suffering and awakening are two sides of the same coin. You can't have one without touching the other. Maybe it's the promotion you worked years for that feels empty the moment you get it. Maybe it's waking up next to someone and feeling utterly alone. The mind-body connection starts broadcasting distress signals, tension in the shoulders, heaviness in the chest, exhaustion that sleep won't cure. Trauma healing begins when you stop calling these symptoms stress and start recognizing them as messengers. Your body knows you're living inside a lie before your mind admits it. This is where the ego performs its greatest magic trick. It convinces you the discomfort is the problem, not the prison. So you try meditation apps, self-help books, new routines, anything to quiet the noise without actually listening to what it's saying. Taoism speaks of wu-wei, effortless action, but you're exerting enormous effort to maintain effortlessness. Self-awareness arrives as an uncomfortable guest. It shows you that every certainty you've built is actually a bar, every identity a cell within a cell. The psychology of pain reveals this truth. What you resist persists, what you deny grows stronger. That calling you're trying to ignore? It's not going away. It's just learning to speak louder. People ask, how do I find my purpose? But the real question is, how do I stop avoiding the purpose that's already found me? Zen philosophy points to the difference between seeking and recognizing. You're not lost. You're refusing to see where you actually are. Think about the person who knows they need to leave the corporate ladder but keeps climbing because everyone expects it. Or the artist who became an accountant because art wasn't practical, and now they're successful and completely hollow inside. These aren't hypothetical examples. These are the countless souls who've traded awakening for approval. Spiritual transformation requires brutal honesty. You have to admit that the life you've built might be beautifully constructed and entirely wrong for you. Non-attachment means letting go of who you thought you'd become to make space for who you actually are. The bars you don't see are made of other people's expectations and your own fear of disappointing them. Every should is a steel beam. Every supposed to is a lock. Mindfulness reveals this architecture of obligation, but awareness alone won't free you. It just shows you how thoroughly you've trapped yourself. Buddhism's concept of samsara, the endless cycle of suffering, lives right here, in the repetition of patterns you've outgrown but can't abandon. Emotional pain intensifies because you're trying to live in two worlds at once, the one you've built and the one calling you forward. Impermanence is knocking on the door, whispering that nothing stays the same, that comfort eventually becomes confinement. And somewhere deep inside, beneath all the noise and negotiation, you're starting to understand that this ache isn't trying to destroy you. It's trying to show you something you've been refusing to look at. The face you show is the oldest wall. It's been under construction since childhood, polished, refined, approved by everyone except the one wearing it. The persona is the prisoner's uniform that looks like freedom because you chose the fabric. Eastern philosophy speaks of the mask we wear to navigate the world. But what happens when the mask becomes so convincing, you forget there's a face beneath it? Shadow work begins when you realize the person everyone admires isn't actually you. It's a performance so rehearsed you've mistaken it for identity. The mirror reflects back what others expect to see, and you've become the reflection, clean, accepted, admired. But every image in a glass cell is still trapped behind glass. No one enters, because the persona won't let them see what's real. Jung called it the persona, the social mask, the acceptable self, the version of you that gets approval. But here's what the psychology of pain reveals. The tighter you grip the mask, the more your true self suffocates beneath it. You present competence when you're drowning in confusion. You perform confidence when you're terrified. You smile through conversations that mean nothing while the real questions die on your tongue. The mind-body connection fractures under this strain. Your face says, "I'm fine," while your body stores the truth in tension, in shallow breathing, in the exhaustion that never lifts. Trauma healing can't begin until you admit that the person you've become isn't who you are. It's who you thought you needed to be to survive. Self-awareness is the crack in the mirror that lets the real face peek through. Buddhism teaches the concept of anatta, non-self, the understanding that the identity we cling to is an illusion. But the ego resists this with everything it has because the persona is its masterpiece, its greatest creation. Think about the successful entrepreneur who can't admit they're lonely, or the spiritual teacher who privately battles rage. These aren't failures of character. They're the inevitable result of performing enlightenment instead of living it. The persona becomes a glass cell where everyone sees in, but no one truly enters, because what they're seeing isn't real. Zen philosophy asks, who were you before you learned who you should be? That question is a sword that cuts through decades of carefully constructed lies. Spiritual transformation requires the courage to let the admired version of you collapse, so the authentic version can breathe. This is where the labyrinth deepens. You've built the persona so carefully for so long that dismantling it feels like suicide. The ego whispers, if they see the real you, they'll leave, and maybe some will. That's the terrifying truth of awakening. Non-attachment means releasing your grip on who you've pretended to be, even if it costs you the approval you've worked your whole life to earn. Taoism speaks of returning to the uncarved block, the original nature before society shaped you into something useful. But useful to whom? Meditation and suffering intersect here, sitting still long enough to feel the suffocation of your own mask, breathing through the panic of being seen without it. Emotional pain intensifies because you're finally feeling what you've been performing around for years. The reflection that controls you isn't in the mirror. It's the one you've been showing the world while hiding yourself. People live entire lifetimes inside the persona, dying without ever being known. They achieve everything society promised would make them happy: the career, the relationship, the respect, and still feel like strangers in their own skin. This is samsara, the endless cycle of suffering, chasing validation for a self that doesn't actually exist. Eastern philosophy points to the danger of mistaking the finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. You've become so focused on the image of enlightenment, of success, of goodness, that you've forgotten the direct experience of simply being. Inner stillness becomes impossible when you're constantly monitoring your reflection, adjusting your mask, maintaining the performance. The psychology of pain teaches that what you don't acknowledge doesn't disappear. It just runs the show from behind the curtain. And the curtain is starting to feel heavy now, isn't it? Like something's pushing from the other side, demanding to be seen, demanding you finally stop performing and start living. To control is to build walls. The ego calls it maturity, calls it responsibility, calls it being realistic. But it's really just fear of the wind. You've spent years constructing the perfect labyrinth, routines that predict every outcome, relationships that stay comfortably surface level, dreams edited down to what's achievable. Eastern philosophy teaches that the tighter you grip, the more you lose. But the ego doesn't believe in empty hands. It believes in blueprints, in 5-year plans, in knowing exactly how everything will unfold. Shadow work reveals the truth. Every wall you've built to keep pain out has also locked you in. The more you try to dominate the future, the denser the invisible cage becomes. Buddhism speaks of tanha, the craving, the clinging, the desperate need to control what cannot be controlled. And here it is, dressed up as wisdom. The labyrinth isn't just physical routines, it's psychological architecture. You've mapped out who you're allowed to be, what feelings are acceptable, which thoughts get permission to exist. The mind-body connection suffers under this tyranny. Your body wants to cry, but you've scheduled no time for weakness. Wants to rage, but you've banned anger from the blueprint. Wants to rest, but productivity is the only acceptable state. Trauma healing requires dismantling these internal structures, but the ego resists because control is its religion. Self-awareness arrives like an earthquake, showing you that every should is a wall, every must is a lock, every can't is a bar you installed yourself. The psychology of pain operates on this principle. The more you try to manage life, the more life becomes unmanageable. You thought you were building a fortress. You were actually constructing a maze with no exit. Taoism speaks of Wu Wei, effortless action, moving with life rather than against it. But the ego hears that as chaos, as irresponsibility, as the dangerous edge of losing everything. So it builds tighter structures, more elaborate systems of control. Think about the person who micromanages every detail of their day because spontaneity feels like falling. Or the parent who controls their children's every move because their own childhood was chaos. These aren't personality flaws. They're survival strategies that outlived their usefulness and became prisons. Zen philosophy asks, what would happen if you stopped trying to dominate the river and simply learned to swim? That question terrifies the ego because swimming requires trust, and trust means relinquishing the illusion of control. Spiritual transformation can't happen inside a controlled environment. It requires the wild, the unknown, the unplanned collapse. The irony is brutal. The more invisible the cage becomes, the more you defend it. You call it having standards when it's really just fear of the unpredictable. You call it being responsible when it's actually an inability to surrender. Non-attachment in Eastern philosophy doesn't mean not caring. It means releasing the death grip on outcomes, on people, on the future you've decided must happen. But the ego's architecture is designed to prevent exactly that. Every contingency plan is another corridor in the labyrinth. Every backup plan is another locked door. Mindfulness reveals this exhausting truth. You're spending all your energy maintaining walls that don't actually protect you from anything except life itself. Impermanence keeps knocking, reminding you that nothing stays the same no matter how tightly you try to hold it. But the ego just builds thicker walls and calls it growth. People mistake the labyrinth for safety, but safety isn't the same as aliveness. You can be perfectly secure and completely dead inside. That's samsara, the wheel of suffering that spins and spins without going anywhere. The psychology of pain shows that ego dissolution feels like death, because in a sense, it is. The death of the false architect, the imaginary controller, the one who thought they could blueprint their way to peace. Buddhism teaches that suffering comes from attachment. And what are these walls if not attachments made solid? Emotional pain intensifies here because you're starting to see that the cell you've called home, the labyrinth you've called wisdom, the control you've called strength, they're all just elaborate ways of avoiding the one thing you truly fear, the vast, uncontrollable openness of being fully alive. And the more you try to dominate it, the denser the invisible cage becomes, until one day the weight of maintaining the mask and managing the maze and controlling the uncontrollable becomes unbearable. One day, the weight of maintaining the mask becomes unbearable. It doesn't ask permission. It just happens. The walls you spent decades building start to crack, not because you wanted them to, but because you no longer fit inside them. Eastern philosophy calls this the dark night of the soul, but it feels more like the ground disappearing beneath your feet. Everything you called solid, the identity, the control, the carefully constructed life, starts crumbling, and the ego screams that this is failure, this is the end. But Buddhism teaches that enlightenment through pain often begins with collapse, with the breaking apart of what was never real to begin with. Shadow work doesn't wait for you to be ready. It arrives when the lie can no longer sustain itself. What you call loss is merely the sound of the prison crumbling, and you're still calling it home as it falls. The collapse isn't one dramatic moment. It's 1,000 small deaths that finally accumulate. The job that defined you ends. The relationship that anchored you dissolves. The persona you performed so perfectly stops working, and people start seeing through it. Trauma healing accelerates in collapse because all the pain you've been managing, controlling, suppressing, it floods in at once. The mind-body connection stops being polite about it. Panic attacks, insomnia, the feeling that your own skin doesn't fit. Self-awareness becomes unavoidable because the masks are falling and there's nowhere left to hide. Taoism speaks of the uncarved block, the return to original nature. But before you get there, you have to watch everything you carved away crumble to dust. The psychology of pain reveals this: what you don't transform, you transmit. And you've been transmitting for so long that now the signal's finally breaking down. This is where the ego makes its last stand. It tries to rebuild the walls mid-collapse, tries to superglue the persona back together, tries to find new forms of control when the old ones shatter. But Zen philosophy teaches that you can't step in the same river twice. The current has changed, and so have you, and the old structures won't hold anymore. Think about the person who loses everything and immediately tries to recreate the exact same life, or the one who hits rock bottom and still refuses to look at what brought them there. These aren't acts of resilience. They're the ego's desperate attempt to avoid awakening. Spiritual transformation requires sitting in the rubble long enough to see what it was actually made of. Non-attachment means letting the collapse complete itself without rushing to reconstruction. Emotional pain peaks here because you're feeling everything you've spent a lifetime avoiding, and there's no persona left to hide behind. People fear collapse more than anything, but what they're really fearing is seeing themselves clearly for the first time. The walls weren't protecting you. They were preventing you from knowing who you actually are beneath the construction. Buddhism speaks of samsara and nirvana, and this is the space between them. The dissolution of one reality before another becomes visible. Meditation and suffering converge in collapse. You're forced into a kind of involuntary mindfulness, where every moment is raw, every sensation unbearable, every thought exposed. Inner stillness seems impossible because everything inside is chaos. But that chaos is actually the sound of truth trying to surface. The psychology of pain teaches that breakthrough looks like breakdown first. Karma and rebirth aren't just concepts, they're lived experiences. The old self dies here, whether you're ready or not. The most dangerous part of collapse is that it doesn't promise anything on the other side. The ego wants guarantees. If I let this fall apart, what comes next? But awakening doesn't work on negotiation. You release the walls, or you don't. You sit in the rubble, or you frantically try to rebuild. Impermanence is no longer philosophy. It's the lived reality that nothing you thought was solid ever was. Eastern philosophy points to this moment as the gateway, but it doesn't feel like a gateway. It feels like an ending. What you call loss is just the prison finally releasing you. But because you've been locked in so long, freedom feels like free fall. The mind whispers that you're losing everything, but the soul knows you're just losing what was never yours to begin with. And in that space where the walls have crumbled and the mask has fallen and the control has evaporated, something else starts to emerge. Something that was buried under all that construction, waiting all this time to finally breathe. When the walls fall, only the wind remains. There's no ground beneath you, no ceiling above, no familiar structure to orient yourself by. The monk smiles and whispers, "This is the first moment that isn't prison." But the mind fears emptiness, because nothing there can be possessed. Eastern philosophy calls this the void, the space of pure potential, but it feels more like annihilation. You've spent your whole life defining yourself by what you have, what you do, what you control, and now there's nothing left to hold. Shadow work reaches its deepest point here. You're face to face with the absence of everything you thought you were. Buddhism teaches that emptiness isn't lack, it's wholeness without the clutter. But the ego can't comprehend that, because the ego is the clutter, and in the void, it has nothing left to organize. This is the space where nothing belongs to you, and that's precisely what makes it terrifying. No identity to claim, no persona to perform, no walls to maintain. The mind-body connection reveals itself in strange ways here. You feel lighter, but also unmoored, freer, but also exposed, alive, but also uncertain if you even exist anymore. Trauma healing enters a paradoxical phase. There's nothing left to heal, because there's no one left to be wounded. Self-awareness becomes pure observation without the observer. Taoism speaks of returning to the source, to the nameless origin before things were named, and this is that return. But it doesn't feel mystical. It feels like standing naked in a storm with nowhere to hide. The psychology of pain shifts here. Without walls, there's nothing to protect you from life, but there's also nothing separating you from it. People avoid the void at all costs, because it strips away every illusion simultaneously. You can't fake anything here. You can't perform your way through. You can't control your way to safety. Zen philosophy points to this as the gateless gate, the threshold you cross by realizing there was never a gate to begin with. Think about the person who loses everything, and instead of rebuilding immediately, just sits in the emptiness for a while. Or the one who achieves ego dissolution not through enlightenment but through complete surrender. These are the souls who've stopped fighting the void and started listening to what it has to say. Spiritual transformation completes in emptiness, not in fullness. Non-attachment stops being a concept and becomes your only reality, because there's nothing left to attach to. Emotional pain doesn't disappear in the void. It just stops defining you. The void is where all the words from Eastern philosophy finally make sense. Not intellectually, but viscerally. Impermanence isn't something you believe. It's what you breathe. Meditation and suffering stop being separate experiences. They're both just presence without decoration. Buddhism's teaching of anatta, non-self, stops being terrifying and starts being obvious. There was never a fixed self to protect in the first place. You were always the space, not the walls. Mindfulness becomes effortless because there's no agenda left to distract you, no future to control, no past to reconstruct. Inner stillness isn't something you achieve. It's what remains when you stop trying to be anything. The psychology of pain reveals its final lesson. Suffering was only possible when you believed you were separate from life. In the void, that separation dissolves. But here's what the ego doesn't want you to know. The void isn't empty. It's full of everything you've been too busy to notice. Wu Wei, effortless flow, stops being a practice and becomes your natural state because there's no resistance left. Karma and rebirth lose their mystery. You see clearly how every action ripples, how every identity was just a temporary costume. Samsara and nirvana aren't different places. They're different relationships to the same moment. The void teaches that enlightenment through pain wasn't about transcending suffering. It was about seeing that the one who suffered was never actually there. Freedom isn't something you earn. It's the moment you see through the illusion that you were ever imprisoned. And in that seeing, something shifts. Not a thought, not a feeling, but a recognition that's been waiting beneath every wall you ever built, every mask you ever wore, every attempt to control the uncontrollable. The insight that was always there, just obscured by the architecture of your own fear. There were never walls, only heavy thoughts. The mind discovers that the cage was made of beliefs, and the moment you see through the illusion, the bars vanish like smoke in wind. Eastern philosophy has been whispering this truth for centuries, but you had to walk through fire to hear it. Freedom isn't something you earn. It's the moment you see through the story you've been telling yourself. Shadow work reaches its culmination here, not in destroying the shadow, but in recognizing it was never separate from the light. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment is simply waking up from the dream of separation, and this is that awakening. The insight doesn't arrive as a grand revelation. It comes quietly, like remembering something you always knew but forgot. Self-awareness becomes transparent. You see that the prisoner, the prison, and the search for freedom were all the same movement of consciousness playing with itself. The prison was made of air, and you spent a lifetime treating it like steel. Every bar was a belief. I'm not enough. I need to be in control. If I let go, I'll fall apart. The psychology of pain reveals its deepest secret. Suffering wasn't caused by life. It was caused by your relationship to life, by the stories you layered over reality until you couldn't see reality anymore. Taoism speaks of the Tao that can be named is not the eternal Tao, and here's why. The moment you named yourself, limited yourself, defined yourself, you created the prison. The mind-body connection finally integrates because the body always knew what the mind was just discovering. You were never trapped, just convinced. Trauma healing completes when you realize the wound was the belief that you needed fixing. Emotional pain dissolves not because circumstances changed, but because the one who interpreted them as painful sees through their own construction. This is where Zen philosophy stops being poetic and becomes practical. The koan. What is your original face before your parents were born? Finally makes sense. It's asking you to see yourself before the story, before the identity, before the prison of thought. Think about the person who spends decades in therapy trying to fix themselves, only to realize there was never anything broken. Or the spiritual seeker who travels the world looking for enlightenment, only to discover it was always here. just hidden beneath seeking. These aren't failures of the journey. They're the journey itself. Spiritual transformation is the recognition that you were always free. You just believed the thought that said you weren't. Non-attachment becomes effortless because you see there's nothing to detach from. You were never actually holding anything real. Meditation and suffering merge into a single understanding. Both are just weather patterns in the vast sky of awareness. The insight rewrites everything retroactively. Every moment of pain, every wall you built, every mask you wore, they were all just consciousness, exploring what it's like to forget itself. Buddhism's concept of samsara and nirvana collapses. They're not two different states, just two different perspectives on the same moment. You were in nirvana the whole time, just convinced you were in samsara. Karma and rebirth stop being mystical and become obvious. Every thought creates a world. Every belief constructs a reality. Every identification births a new prison. Mindfulness isn't about being present. It's about recognizing you were never actually absent. Inner stillness isn't achieved. It's revealed as what's always been here beneath the noise. The psychology of pain shows its final card. You weren't healing from trauma. You were waking up from the dream that trauma could define you. Eastern philosophy teaches that the finger pointing at the moon is not the moon itself. And now you see. Every wall, every struggle, every dark night of the soul was just a finger pointing at this moment of recognition. Impermanence stops being a teaching and becomes a celebration. Nothing stays, nothing needs to stay. Everything's already perfect in its passing. Wu Wei, effortless action, becomes your natural state because there's no ego left to effort, no self left to achieve, no one left trying to be free. The prison was made of air, constructed from thoughts you believed, sustained by a story you inherited, maintained by fear of the very freedom you were seeking. And the moment you see through it, not think through it, but see through it, the bars don't break. They simply reveal they were never there. What you called awakening was just the recognition that you were never actually asleep, just dreaming with your eyes open. And now, seeing clearly for the first time, the question becomes, what do you do with a freedom you always had, but never knew? How do you live in a world that hasn't changed, when everything about how you see it has? Now there is no prisoner and no liberator, only presence. The cell still exists, but it no longer defines you. You walk through the same world, touch the same objects, speak to the same people, but something fundamental has shifted. You're no longer trying to be free. True freedom begins when you stop trying to be free, when you realize that freedom isn't a destination but the ground you've always been standing on. Eastern philosophy calls this integration, the return to ordinary life with extraordinary eyes.
Shadow work completes not by eliminating darkness, but by including it, by seeing that light and shadow dance together. Buddhism teaches that after enlightenment, you still chop wood and carry water. But now the wood is just wood, the water just water, and you're just the chopping and carrying without the story of a you doing it. The insight doesn't remove you from the world. It places you fully in it for the first time.
You still feel emotional pain, still encounter suffering and awakening, still face the ordinary chaos of being human, but now there's space around it. The mind-body connection deepens into something more fluid. Your body becomes a temple, not because it's sacred, but because everything is, and nothing needs to be. Trauma healing transforms from fixing what's broken to honoring what survived. Self-awareness stops being a practice and becomes your natural way of seeing. You notice thoughts without believing them, feel emotions without becoming them, move through life without needing it to be different than it is. Taoism speaks of the sage who lives in the world but is not of it. And now you understand. You participate fully while attached to nothing, present completely while grasping at nothing. This is where spiritual transformation becomes practical. where philosophy becomes breath. You still have preferences, still make choices, still navigate relationships and responsibilities. But the prison is gone because you see through the beliefs that constructed it. Zen philosophy teaches that before enlightenment, mountains are mountains. During the journey, mountains are not mountains. After awakening, mountains are mountains again. You're back where you started, but you're not the same person who left. Think about the parent who returns to their family after ego dissolution. They still parent, but without the need to control outcomes. Or the artist who creates again after the collapse. But now the art flows from emptiness rather than seeking validation. These aren't different people. They're the same consciousness expressing through a nervous system that's finally stopped fighting itself. Non-attachment in action looks like full engagement without the need for things to last. Complete presence without demanding permanence. People expect awakening to remove you from ordinary life, but integration is the return to it with clear eyes. You're calling the world again, but you're no longer calling from inside a prison. You're calling from the space where nothing belongs to you and everything is available. The psychology of pain reveals its final integration. Pain still arises, but it no longer creates suffering because suffering was always the story about the pain, not the pain itself. Buddhism's teachings on impermanence become lived experience. You watch things arise and pass without needing to hold them. Witness thoughts appear and dissolve without believing they're you. Feel emotions move through without identifying as them. Meditation and suffering are no longer separate paths. They're both just a tension-meeting experience without the filter of a false self. Inner stillness doesn't mean you stop moving. It means you move from center, from the void that's full of everything, from presence that doesn't require preference. The integration is subtle, almost invisible. You still go to work, still pay bills, still have conversations about weather and politics, but there's no one going to work, no one paying bills, no one having conversations. There's just the working, the paying, the conversing, happening through this body, this mind, this moment. Eastern philosophy stops being wisdom you study and becomes wisdom you are. Wu Wei, effortless flow, isn't something you practice. It's what remains when you stop resisting the river. Karma and rebirth continue, but you see them clearly now. Every moment is a rebirth. Every action plants seeds, and you're both the garden and the gardener, and the space in which both appear. Samsara and nirvana lose their distinction because you see that suffering was only possible through the illusion of separation, and that illusion has been seen through. The world hasn't changed, but your relationship to it has transformed completely. You're free not because the prison disappeared, but because you finally see it was only ever made of air. And now, standing in this ordinary moment, breathing this ordinary breath, living this ordinary, extraordinary life, you understand that freedom was never about escape. It was always about returning home to what you never actually left. The walls were always made of air. You spent years believing you were trapped, defending the very bars that never existed, perfecting a prison you could have walked out of at any moment. Eastern philosophy whispers what you now know. Freedom isn't something you achieve. It's what remains when you stop believing the story that you're not already free. Shadow work doesn't end. Ego dissolution isn't a destination.
Spiritual transformation continues with every breath, every choice, every moment you remember that the cage was only ever a thought you believed too deeply. Buddhism teaches that enlightenment through pain isn't about transcending suffering. It's about seeing clearly that the one who suffered was never actually bound. The prison, the prisoner, the search for freedom, they were all movements of the same consciousness, exploring what it's like to forget itself, just so it could remember again.
So here's what's left to ask. Do you still believe the walls are real? Or can you finally see through them? Are you ready to stop performing freedom and start living it. What would you do if you realized you've been free this entire time, just convinced otherwise? The insight is here. The integration is available. The void that terrified you is the space where everything becomes possible. Non-attachment, mindfulness, wu-wei, they're not practices anymore. They're just what happens when you stop fighting the river and learn to move with it. But seeing through the prison is only the beginning. Because once the walls fall, once you recognize the cage was made of air, you're left standing in something vast and quiet, a space where words lose their power and presence becomes everything. There's a force in that silence, something ancient that doesn't push or demand, that doesn't construct or control. Lao Tzu knew it. The Tao speaks of it. And if you're ready to go deeper, to explore what fills the void after the collapse, then the next step is waiting for you. If this video cracked something open, if it touched a wall you didn't know you were defending, then don't stop here. The journey continues in the force that silences. Lao Tzu would call it peace. It's where we explore what happens after awakening, after the prison falls, when you're finally standing in the space where everything is still and everything is alive. The psychology of pain, the teachings of Taoism, the path of spiritual transformation, they all point to the same truth. You were never broken. You were never lost. You were just temporarily convinced by a story that had no author and no beginning. And now that story is ending. Continue caminando. The next lesson is waiting.